Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford.
Glad to be here, Joy.
Welcome back, Larry.
Thank you.
Hope you had a good New Year.
You too.
Thank you. By now, most of our listeners have probably heard Trump's comments on the Panama Canal. So we thought we would delve a little into this discussion on his claims and the history of the Panama Canal, as well as the economic significance and possible military strategy of the canal. Larry is writing a paper, an article on the Panama Canal, so that should be up on our website and all of our social media platforms shortly. And you can find all of Larry's papers on our website, www.ascf.us. Sign up for our newsletter to receive notice of our upcoming webinars, podcasts, and articles. You also can find his articles on Substack. And if you become a member of the ASCF, you will receive a paid subscription to Substack worth $80. So Larry, could you give us a little background on the Panama Canal, a little history?
Well, as you alluded to, that Trump said that Panama should not fall under the control of China, and tariffs were being ripped off on. I'll address those two issues. Well, first of all, China is a major player throughout the world as far as economics are concerned. And I don't see how the United States is going to stop China from doing what it's doing. The United States has to do a better job at what Americans should be doing, namely growing our economy ourselves and growing our military to counter China. And as far as control of Panama by China, and Trump has sort of threatened the sovereignty of Panama, that's not a good move. Those days are long gone where we can enforce the Monroe Doctrine. China has the Belt and Road Initiative in Panama where they build infrastructure. And if you're the leader of Panama, you're trying to improve the lot of your citizens. If a country is willing to build infrastructure like roads and hospitals and things like that, then I think I'd be open to them doing it. The danger, of course, with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is that the terms of the loans that they use to build these things sometimes are sort of onerous. That it's a catch-22. You can't afford to pay them back, and so then China starts asserting control. Panama is nowhere near that situation. They're a fairly well-organized country, and they're doing well. So they control the ports through Hutchinson, which is a Hong Kong-based company. But that doesn't mean that they control it so that American ships can't go through. It means there aren't that many American ships anymore, for one thing. That's another thing the country should be working on, and getting rid of some of the archaic laws that influence the maritime. We have hardly any. The Jones Act is one. The Jones Act is one. We have hardly any ships, so there aren't American ships. There's ships going to America, to and from America, but they're not American ships.
So what you brought up the Hutchinson port holdings, or what Hutchinson Wampoma at one time, I believe. They also have controlling interest in Freeport in the Bahamas, not far off of our coast at all. But again, they're just managing the port for the most part. They're not turning away U.S. ships.
And the recent contract that Panama just signed with Hutchinson Port Holdings is a 25-year contract, and it's estimated to bring in an estimated $800 million to Panama. Gee, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. I don't see why American companies couldn't make a bid to manage the ports too, but the Chinese have made the bid and they are running it. Again, there's some danger with China if they control everything. But China is China, and you can't hide ourselves and sticking our heads in the sand thinking China is going to go away. So we just have to start working harder and smarter to represent our interests and to point out, through soft power, for example, through the Voice of America and some other areas, the dangers of getting into bed with China. So there's upsides and there's downsides.
So now getting back to the history of the Panama Canal, so I understand that the U.S. built the Panama Canal.
Yeah, well, the U.S. built it, but the hands were kind of dirty in a way. Since the 1500s, explorers have wanted to figure out a way of crossing the Isthmus of Panama. It's less than 50 miles across from the Atlantic Ocean side in the Caribbean to the Pacific side. But the problem is that 50 miles is a jungle-infested tropical nest of insects, diseases, rainfalls, it's mountains. So it's very difficult to build a canal. But finally in the 1800s, after the Suez Canal was built by the French in Egypt, connecting the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, these guys made a ton of money, and so they said, well, we'll build a canal, sea level canal, in Panama. So they got a concession from Colombia, which at that time controlled Panama. It was part of the Colombian country. And they got a concession to build it. And 10 years later, $500 million, thousands and thousands of deaths to build a sea level canal. They folded. They ran out of money after $500 million. In 1901, Teddy Roosevelt helped Panama declare independence. And when the Panamanians declared independence from Colombia, the U.S. Navy and Army were already there. So Colombia could not come in to reinforce their authority, and Panama was declared independent. They signed a deal with the United States to take over the French concessions, and the construction began, and $500 million later, or the equivalent in today's money of roughly $15 billion.
Wow.
The canal was built by American ingenuity. It was really an engineering marvel. And they built the locks which raised the ships up, sailed them across the lake, and the lake was enlarged by building dams so there was a lot of water in the lake. And then they locks on the other side, and they load them to the side.
I had a little experience on the Erie Canal with that, so I got somewhat of a picture.
Yeah, so it was a great success, and the U.S. controlled a strip of land across Panama for the canal, on both sides of the canal, and it was the Panama Canal Zone. And
so did the U.S. charge tolls on that?
But the money on those tolls went to the U.S. Treasury, not to Panama, and a lot of the workers were foreigners, not Panamanians, so Panama got limited benefit from the canal. And they complained about the breach of their sovereignty. They were complaining about it right from the day one, which I can understand in a way.
So that's why we turned over the canal to Panama?
Yeah, well, eventually, the canal was built in the early 1900s. So as time goes on, the cries for independence, especially after World War II, of independence and the colonies and all that sort of stuff. And I think one of the tipping points was in the 50s when the Egyptians took over the Suez Canal. And President Eisenhower went after the British and French because they were sending troops in along with Israel to take control back under the French and British company to run the canal. And Eisenhower said, no, you're not. It belongs to Egypt. Live with it. And so the Panamanians now start saying, well, gee, you supported Egypt. How come you're not supporting us? So what's going? So eventually, finally, President Carter, signed a deal saying we're going to turn over Panama. And I think it was absolutely the right decision to turn over Panama. And in 1999, complete control was turned over. And since then, Panama has done a great job running it. They've added to its capacity, and their tariffs have increased like everything else.
So their tolls now go toward Panama.
Precisely. And they make a lot of money off the tolls. Panamanians run the thing, and they've done a great job running it. And they've added another series of locks, so the capacity's up. The big problem they're having right now, and part of the thing that Trump might be complaining about, is tariffs have run up, and there's a surcharge for certain types of ships because there's a water shortage from rainfall. So the lakes don't have as much water in there to feed the locks, and therefore the ships can't carry as much cargo through the locks as they normally do. So there's backlogs, and there's all sorts of finaglers. So, but
those tolls are affecting everyone because of the water shortage, not just the U.S.
That's exactly right, Joy. So, but I think Trump is trying to address it, and we've talked about this. If he's bringing up Panama, he's bringing up Greenland, he's bringing up Canada, he's bringing this up to present the dangers of China. I'm not sure that's the approach I'd use to talk about the dangers of China. And the hypocrisy. It's always
the way that Trump brings up stuff.
and for him to talk about the dangers of China, so why is he asking the Supreme Court to delay implementation of a law passed in Congress, bipartisan, to ban TikTok? It's going to happen in a couple of weeks. He wants a delay so they can negotiate the deal. TikTok is a clear and present danger to national security. It propagandizes the Chinese viewpoint on the world. demeans America. It's corrupting American youth with rabbit holes going down for misbehavior. It helps Chinese businesses to the detriment of American businesses. It politicizes areas. It's taken political positions. To me, TikTok is a no-brainer. So the million teenagers love TikTok. So be it, guys.
On that point, TikTok goes back to the mother company ByteDance in China.
Right.
And there's concerns for national security issues.
Yep.
So is there legitimate concerns for national security issues with with China's presence on both sides of the canal and smart ports? I want to say like the cranes, the Huawei.
Of course they are. But should we get involved in telling Panama, no, you shouldn't do business with the Chinese, when we're allowing the Chinese to run amok with TikTok?
No, that's their sovereignty.
Yeah. And it's your good point, Joy. You know, the Chinese say, well, we're really a Singapore company. TikTok says, we're really a company in Singapore. But they're owned by ByteDance, which is in Beijing. And the Chinese have a law that every Chinese company, every Chinese organization has a duty, and it's the law that if the Chinese government asks you for information on anything, it's your duty and the law to provide it. So TikTok is vacuuming up millions and millions of American personal data, shipping it to Singapore. And they say, well, we're not shipping it to China. Anybody believes the CCP isn't doing what they want to do. I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
Well, that brings you to Hutchinson also. You said that's in Hong Kong.
Right, yeah.
Conglomerate, but we all know what happened with Hong Kong and China. So.
Yeah, that's right. I lived in Hong Kong in the early 70s, and I had a little business relationship with Hutchinson. In those days, it was owned by the British, and now it's owned by the Chinese.
Yep. And so while it may be Panama's sovereignty to decide what to do there, do you think that China has enough influence with their ports on either side of the canal to pressure Panama?
Of course they do. They can pressure Panama just like we can pressure Panama. There's all sorts of things we can do. It's part of the power play of what we're living in, and who knows what's going to happen down the road as far as China. I mean, China has a lot of internal problems. The U.S. has a lot of internal problems. Who knows? Panama has a new election. They have somebody come in that doesn't like the Chinese, and that could change too. But I think so far, China's been playing it pretty smart. They're building the infrastructure, the highways, the hospitals, the stadiums. And I think their lending under the Belt and Road Initiative is becoming more open, so it's not as onerous as it was, say, back in the days when they made the deal with Sri Lanka.
Yeah. And more countries are aware of their
Precisely.
plans with the Belt and Road Initiative as well.
And so in my papers, I always recommend a course of action, and almost every one of my courses of actions, every paper is, we have to be much more aggressive in soft power, gray zone activities of like Voice of America, propaganda. We have to be much more assertive in our projection of American democracy versus totalitarian, freedom versus tyranny. If you had a debate between the positive aspects of China versus the positive aspects of America, the negative aspects of China versus the negative aspects of America, the person from Mars would say there's no discussion, really. America is a much better civilization than the Chinese.
Freer, for sure.
Yeah. So.
Well, so basically, the U.S. is not really being treated differently than other countries transitioning through the Panama Canal.
Yes, basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
Because of the water shortage, there's more of a cost.
Yeah. And there's a lot more Chinese ships going through there because the Chinese have a merchant fleet. The U.S. doesn't have a merchant fleet anymore.
So that gets to my next point. So our peace through strength strategies, are we successfully competing with the Chinese at the Panama Canal?
I don't know what we should do. We could just conduct business and let the Panamanians protect themselves as best they can, and we help them protect them against Chinese interests. But the Chinese are here to do business.
Do we need as much transitioning as the Chinese do? I mean, could we send our goods via railway across from the East Coast to West Coast?
We could do there's all sorts of things. I mean, it's important trade thing for the United States. But you know, if the thing shut down tomorrow, all it would do would probably affect Chinese trade more than American trade. So, I mean, our trade is between Canada is greater, our trade between Mexico is greater, our trade with Europe is greater. No.
So do we have any military presence down in Panama anymore?
Not anymore. We used to have a military down there.
We did.
Yeah. Not anymore.
And what about the Chinese? Do they have any military presence?
The only place that China has military bases, Joy, is in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa or by the Red Sea, where America
As do we.
as do Americans. And that's the only place in the world, maybe with the exception of Cambodia, and that's questionable, where Chinese have a military presence as opposed to America, which has over 100 military facilities spread out throughout the world. So
I guess, and bring up the Red Sea, this is a little off topic here maybe, but so is it possible that one day if the Chinese went after Taiwan, if the U.S. got upset with them, or upset with us over tariffs, whatever, they wanted to put pressure, something could happen like the Houthis going after ships coming through the Red Sea.
Right.
Could the Chinese come after ships going through
Well, they are,
Panama?
sure they can, yeah.
So then there would be a national
I don't know,
security concern.
how would the Chinese get to Panama? They'd have to go by ship.
Yes.
So if the U.S. follows our strategy of peace through strength, we could take care of their ships coming across the Pacific, just like probably they're going to take care of our ships when we come across the Pacific to defend Taiwan. Missiles have changed everything. Drones. Yeah. So, scary world out there, Joy.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you, Larry. I appreciate your input on the Panama Canal.
Well, thank you, Joy. Enjoyed it.
Look forward to your article coming out. Look for it this week, or maybe next week on our.
No, we'll be
this
done
week. Okay, this week it is. Thank you all for listening today. Please subscribe, share, and comment on our YouTube and Rebel channels. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Substack. And you can listen to us on your audio podcast on either your Apple or Android phone. Join us again next time for our Peace Through Strength podcast.